Hi, I'm Ian Jukes. I'll be your host today. This is the second session in the Fluency series titled Literacy is Still Not Enough. At the completion of this session, you'll have a clear understanding of the difference between literacy and fluency, and you'll be able to explain why it's critical for all learners to be fluent and not just literate. But before we begin, I want to welcome you to the Committed Sardine channel. The first thing I want to say is that I believe education's continued focus on traditional literacies such as reading, writing, and arithmetic, while important, is no longer enough. You see, we're already 2 decades into the 21st century, but the 20th century literacies continue to be the primary focus for education. The problem is that even if we were to successfully educate every single student at the prescribed and assessed standards of the 20th century literacies, it would result in learners who would be literate by the standards of the 20th century, but would not be literate based on the needs and the demands of our modern, rapidly changing world. You see, in disruptive times like the ones we're living through right now, literacy is still not enough. We need to move our teaching, we need to move learning, we need to move our assessment beyond our historical focus on the 20th century literacies and equip our students with the fluencies, the essential new basic skills for modern learning. Let me explain. In the 1970s, Elon Burch theorized that there were 4 levels of awareness. First, being unconsciously unaware. In other words, you don't know you don't know. Next, being consciously unaware, meaning you know that you don't know. Then being consciously aware. In other words, you know that you know. And finally, being unconsciously aware, meaning you don't know that you know. So, what is the difference between literacy and fluency? In general, literacies primarily focus on memorizing content and procedural recall, while fluencies focus on learning mental processes and skills that can be explicitly taught, memorized, learned, practiced, applied, repeated, adapted, and in due course developed into unconscious habits of mind. I'd like to share a couple of examples that will help you differentiate between literacy and fluency. First, think about language. Someone who's literate speaking Spanish will have a working knowledge of the language, but they'll probably have to stop frequently to translate their thoughts from English into Spanish before they speak. They'll have to regularly pause and think about things like pronunciation and grammatical structure. As a result, while they may be understood by others, their speech will probably be slow and halting, because they'll need to pause regularly to think about what they want to say next and how they want to say it. Now compare the speech of someone who's literate in Spanish to that of someone who is fluent in Spanish. If someone is fluent in Spanish, they can speak fluidly and continuously without having to pause to think about how the language is constructed and without having to translate their thoughts from English into Spanish before they speak. If they are fluent, they've reached the level of what Burch called unconscious proficiency. And just as importantly, a person who is fluent can use their understanding of the language not just to recall facts they've memorized, they can also use their understanding to create something new, like a story, a song, a play, a poem, or to carry on a conversation. Think about riding a bicycle. When you first got your bike as a child, you probably needed training wheels or someone with a steady hand to support you as you learned to ride. But over time, you learned to ride the bike without needing help. Between your childhood and now, you probably went away from riding a bicycle for extended periods of time, maybe even for years. But when you finally got back on a bicycle after all that time, the question is, how long did it take you to feel comfortable riding the new bike? For most of us, it's a matter of minutes. That's because riding a bike has become a fluency. Once the skills have been learned and internalized, riding a bicycle becomes an unconscious process. As soon as you feel comfortable with the seat, the brakes, the pedals, the gears, and the handlebars, you don't have to think. You don't need to focus on the mechanics of the bike. You just ride and focus on the road ahead. That's because fluencies go a step beyond literacies and simple memory recall. Fluencies focus on the metacognitive thinking processes needed to adapt literacy skills from one task and apply them to another. And this unconscious process allows individuals to rapidly adapt and apply these skills to new and different situations. Fluency is about the speed, the quality, the quantity of the responses you can draw on to generate answers to questions, to make new connections between ideas and solve problems, because a fluent brain can quickly sort through alternatives and identify the most appropriate responses to a task or challenge. Let me give you one final example of fluency. Imagine a quarterback standing on the line of scrimmage, scanning the field as they get ready to take the snap and run a play. Depending on the circumstances and their level of experience or fluency, the quarterback might choose to throw the ball exactly the way the play was originally planned and practiced. However, a more experienced quarterback might decide to improvise based on what's happening on the field at that moment. The more experienced and cognitively flexible or fluent the quarterback is, the more likely they'll be to react to the circumstances and think on the fly, and the more options they'll have to choose from, which makes it more likely that they'll be able to throw the ball where they want and experience success. The same thing applies to any fluency. For example, a writer who can choose between 30 ways to describe something or who knows 30 different ways to express an idea has a far greater ability to identify the most appropriate words needed to make a point. Compare this with someone who can only come up with a single example or has a limited vocabulary. For example, a writer who knows 30 ways to describe "it was a dark and stormy night" will inevitably be able to construct better prose and poetry than someone whose only way to describe it was "the weather was bad." That, in an 8-minute sprint, is the difference between being literate and being fluent. With this in mind, as a closing activity, please take a moment to reflect on the difference between literacy and fluency and to consider why it's important to strive for fluency and not just literacy. I want to thank you for joining me for the second session in the Fluency series. In our next video, we'll take a closer look at solution fluency. If you enjoyed this session, please leave a comment below and tell us a little bit about yourself. And if you have suggestions for sessions you'd like to watch, let us know. Please remember to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you'll be notified when we post new videos. In the meantime, thanks for watching. We hope to see you soon.